Thank you. Thanks, Lindsay. All right. Sir Edmund Hillary. It's probably one of the most inspiring men that you've never likely heard of. But for those who are not up to date with your British history, in 1953, this man set out on a journey. He set out on a journey with one goal in mind, out to Nepal, to reach the top of Everest, the highest mountain in the world, 29,000 feet above sea level, something that had never been done before. And that's not to say that it hadn't been attempted. It had been attempted many times, but people had failed and perished along the way. And so you could say that Edward had his work cut out for him. So he got to work. He started assembling a team of experts that could guide them along this journey, guide him through this path to the top of Everest. He had 400 of these people assembled to help him through this process. He had to get resources. This was an extremely expensive project. He had to go to the British government and get funding allocated for this process. He had to get resources. There was 10,000 pounds of luggage that Edward brought up the mountain with him. They took months planning this out. This was a 3-month journey to get to the top of Everest, and they had to map out every single step of the way, because if they didn't, they had to avoid all the pitfalls, avoid all the tragedies that had happened in previous expeditions to have this carefully mapped out route where they needed to go over these 3 months. And on March of 1953, Edmund and his team started up this path, started up the path that they had so carefully mapped out for the months prior to their expedition. And it started out pretty good. They started up their path, they got to the first camp, kept moving up the mountain, and they got to the second camp. And as they were moving up the mountain, something unexpected happened. They ran into a storm of something that they'd never seen before, something like none of them had seen. And these were the types of storms that had engulfed the teams that had come before and captured their lives. And so as things looked grim, as they were trying to move up this path that they had planned, this storm was running them into issues. And as Edmund became more and more desperate, he had to start thinking about what could he do to save his team and save himself and still move up the mountain. So we're going to pause there for a second. We'll return to Edmund and talk about what happened to him. But I want you to think about, does this story sound like something that you've experienced before? Is this something that you or a client have gone through before? Now, I've worked both internally at companies. I also worked on the agency side. I was a partner agency for 4 years at Savvy Panda. And we went through this. And you know what this sounds like to me? It sounds like a website redesign. And if you put yourselves in the shoes of your clients, and you think about what they have to do, they have to assemble a team, just like Edmund did. They have to have a team of experts to lead them through this process of a website redesign. Whether that's internal or coming to you, the agency, to be the trusted leaders in guiding them through this process. They have to request budget, right? Average website, $15,000 to $80,000 for a small, medium business. That's something they have to plan for, they have to request for. It's a big time commitment. 3 months, a quarter of the entire year is devoted to this process of building a website redesign. And they come to us, and what do? We plan out everything. We have to scope it. We have to price it. We map it all out in our schedules. And we start planning all of these things from step to step to step. And we have this really clear path of what we need to do. And the funny thing is this actually looks like the side of a mountain. And coming out of this, who here by a show of hands has ever had the problem where they launch a site that's off budget or not on time? And whoever's hands down is lying or doesn't do websites, because it happens. And we've accepted that. And we've figured out some smart ways as agencies to build in some extra time here, to build in some extra budget here, to account for those areas where we may have some discrepancies. But at the end of the day, there's some fundamental problems there. And there's an even bigger fundamental problem that we need to think about. I always like to ask the question, how do we know that what we launch is the best performing website possible? At the end of the day, we spend all this time, all this money, all this research, we go through this whole entire process, we launch it. What are we launching? We're launching nothing more than a hypothesis. So if we look at the traditional website redesign process, you have a site, and generally speaking, outside of some general updates, some small things here and there, it generally sits for about 1.5 to 2 years. They're just so happy that redesign is over, they don't want to touch it for 1.5 to 2 years. And it gets to the point where this website is so outdated, they come to you and they say, we need to have a new website. It's completely, looks like it's from the 90s. And so you go through this big journey we just talked about with all this inherent risk. And what you launch is nothing more than an educated guess. There is no way that you know that this is the best performing site possible. All you can do is go and look at the previous data, do your quantitative research, see how people are interacting, how they're moving around the site, do some proactive research, qualitative stuff, talking to users, figuring out how you can make improvements, and then you put together your best guess on what a better performing site would be, and you launch the thing. But then you never validate what you launch, and it sits for another 1.5 to 2 years. And we've all been in these scenarios. I've been in these scenarios where you launch the site and you have an oh shit moment, where what you launched is not necessarily better performing for whatever reason that is. And so what I'm trying to say here is when we look at the traditional website redesign process, there's inherent risk, systematic risk built into what it is. And we don't think about these things. We think about that this is just how website design is. And it's risk for your clients and your prospects, and it's risk for you as an agency. So we've talked about these from a client's perspective, the upfront cost that they have to endure, the time it takes, the amount of resources and time they're putting into this thing, and the fact that it still can go out of scope, still can go over budget, and still be delivered late. The fact that it's a hypothesis when we launch our site. We don't know that it's for sure going to make the impact that it's worth investing that time and money in. And then the fact that it sits for 2 years without us really making any impactful updates. And when we flip this around and look at the agency side of this, the risk that's associated for your agency, right? At the end of the day, the client's risk are our risk. We are here to provide better quality results and grow the businesses of our clients. And so all of those things affect us in that way. But on top of that, we're not really using a very data-driven approach to what works for that particular client, for their particular users. We're like, oh, these are the best trends. Oh, right now, like this is really popular, this is really popular, parallax scrolling is really popular, let's throw that in there. And we have no clue if that actually impacts the results that we get for our clients. It's hard to grow with projects, right? That's probably why you're here. Probably why you signed up for Inbound. Inbound, we have this awesome retainer model, but then we're stuck doing project work over on the website side, and it's very hard to scale and grow developers when we're having to always fill these gaps where we don't have a project in the queue. Because it goes out of scope, because it goes over budget, that needs to come from somewhere. You can either eat the cost as an agency where your profit margins dive, or you can pass it on to the client, which of course the client doesn't like when it goes out of scope and you have to do an addendum. There's also project risk. If it goes out of timeline, then that pushes everything else back that you have in the queue. And then lastly, out of all of that, we don't have a system. So we figured out a really systematic way to go about marketing, inbound marketing, right? You know all the steps. We don't have a system for websites, the processes, the launching, the ongoing improvement. We have no system with traditional website redesign. So what are we supposed to do as agencies? Are we just stuck? Is this just how things are and we have to accept it? Well, I envision a better way. I envision a better way that not only is a better process and methodology, a totally different way of looking at the process we go through, a different lens to look at how we build websites, that not only provides better results for our clients, helps our businesses, our agencies grow, and then also is easier to sell in the selling process. What does that look like? So, I call it growth-driven design. And growth-driven design is based off of 3 fundamental pillars. The first one is that we are trying to minimize risk. As we're building this out, we're trying to figure out how do we minimize all of those things that we talked about, not only from the agency side, but also from the client side. The second pillar is about continuously learning and improving. So knowing that we're always going to be learning, there's always something we learn about the users and improve on the site. It's not a static thing. Our sites are not static things. And then lastly, how do we take what we learned in this step of the process and apply that to our marketing and sales, to inform our marketing and sales so we can do better marketing and sales, and vice versa. What are we learning in the marketing and sales process that we can turn around and impact what we do in our growth-driven design process? So what that ends up looking like comparatively to the traditional website redesign model is this continuous improvement where you're iterating, and every single month you're updating, you're making changes, very impactful changes that ultimately result in all of this potential opportunity being missed out in the traditional website redesign process. And the layer that lives on top of this, these are not independent pieces, these are the layer that lives on top is our inbound marketing and our inbound sales. And as we talked about, growth-driven design informs how to do inbound marketing sales better, and inbound marketing sales informs how we do our growth-driven design. What does this look like? So let's take a step back and let's dig into what does this process actually look like. Well, The beginning of the process probably looks pretty similar to what you're already doing on your sites today in terms of starting with strategy. Strategy is the foundation where we're going to build everything else that we're moving forward and inform all of our decisions. And what that strategy is made up of from a very high level. This is all high level stuff. We can dig into the specifics later. But we're starting with the goals and personas, right? Sounds pretty similar to what you're doing on the inbound marketing side. What are we trying to achieve? What impact is that going to, are we trying to make on the business, and why is that important? And who are the people that are coming to our site, and who are the people that we're interacting with? You guys are all experts on this on the inbound marketing side. Then we take a quantitative look. We look at all the website analytics and data and figure out how are they moving, why are they moving, where is the drop off in the funnel, and really taking a look at how their current users of the current site are having points of pain and problem with the current site. And then we can do our proactive, our user research, start learning about them, asking them questions, learning more about those personas. And at this point, we're able to make some fundamental assumptions. We can make some fundamental assumptions about our value props. We can make some fundamental assumptions of why they're coming here, where they're coming from, what their points of pain are, and start figuring out how do we build that into a global, and how do we build that into a page-by-page based strategy based off of those fundamental assumptions. Now, coming out of that, coming out of our goals, our personas, all the research we've done, our assumptions and our strategy, we have a million different ideas, right? The client's giving you specs that you need to add to the site, requirements they have. You have a ton of ideas as a team on how to accomplish their goals. And at the end of the day, coming out of the strategy, we have a brainstorming, a wish list. And this wish list is everything that you want to implement on the site. Coming out of that wish list, it allows us to start thinking about what we call a launchpad website. And it's called a launchpad website because when we think of traditional website redesigns, we think the launch is the end. And that's the complete opposite. The launchpad website is the beginning of growth-driven design. And so a launchpad website, we go through that wish list, that 150 items that we have written down on our board, and we do an 80-20 analysis to figure out what are the 20% of those items that are going to make 80% of the impact to the impact on the business and to the value of the users coming to the site. We pull those things aside and we look at what are the must-haves, what are the nice-to-haves. It starts you filtering down on what do we need to have as a minimum viable product, which clients don't like, so don't call it that, but a launchpad website for us to start with. And at that point, we can start going through some of the steps that you probably are already doing in the traditional website design process. On a very high level, things like messaging, content, architecture, UX navigation, wireframing, design, and dev, right? Those are kind of the pillars of what goes into a traditional website redesign. From a very high level, there's a ton of stuff that goes into that. And along the way, while we're doing each one of these, again, we're still doing UX testing. We're still doing learning so that we can see, are we moving in the right direction with our Launchpad site? We need to figure out what data collection methods do we need to start validating our hypothesis on all those fundamental assumptions, on all of those strategies. Where are we going in the right direction? Make sure that we have those tools installed, we have the funnels built out, whatever that data collection that we need to be doing along the way. But the goal of a Launchpad website is to launch quick, right? The longer that we sit building a site, the less ability we have to learn and go in the right direction. And so the goal of this is to try and get it done in the first month. And it depends on the size of the client, depends on the size of the site, but our goal is to try and get this first phase done in the first month so that we can start improving. And again, this is a starting point, not a destination. So what do we do from there? From there, you have this big laundry list of all these different things that you wanted to implement on the site, right? You did your 80-20 analysis. You at least got your Launchpad site going with the most impactful things, but you still have a laundry list of things. And these are going to, generally speaking, these are going to fit in a few different buckets. The first bucket that these wish list items may fit in is something related to conversion rate optimization or boosting conversions. So some examples of this is looking at the user path and how you can improve that, looking at conversion points, doing split testing, value prop tests. All of those things and a ton of other options are maybe one bucket where some of those wish list items maybe that you want to implement. The second bucket is talking about improving user experience. So looking at the navigation. A good example of this is your blog layout. Like, how do you tag things? How do you categorize things? Where do you show the different tags and the different ways to search through the blogs? Finding ways to improve the user experience with navigating through your content, right? And then you can also look at things like mobile and figuring out how is the user experience different. Now, there's some overlap in that for sure between conversion rate optimization and user experience, but you can start segmenting them up in those buckets. The third bucket is personalization. right? So we learned a long time ago as marketers that mass emails didn't work. When we sent an email out to an entire list, we had very poor results. All of a sudden we got smart. We were like, okay, cool, let's start segmenting them and sending tailored content, tailored offers for different segments, right? This is something we've been doing for years, but yet this is not something we've been doing on our site. And I think one of the problems that we've had, we have smart content, so we have the tools, but from my experience as a partner and from talking to other partners, we have the tools, but no one's doing it. It's like a cool concept. It's a cool idea, but no one's figured out how to actually put it into play in a process. And this is a process that you can follow that actually starts allowing you to start implementing more and more personalization and seeing the results. Whether by interest, device, country, previous actions, whatever that is that you're segmenting by. And the last bucket is what I call building marketing assets. So we think of an asset of a business. Those are things like your machines, your vehicles, your computers. These are things that hold value to the business. And when we think of our marketing department, we have assets as well. Our website is our #1 asset, which is why it's crazy that it sits for 2 years without updates. But our website is our biggest asset. Our email lists are our asset. Our social lists are our asset. All of these things are assets. So how can we start integrating more and more assets, things that provide value on the site, things like tools? So a great example that you're all familiar with is Marketing Grader. That's an asset that HubSpot built that drives tons of value for the end user and drives tons of value for HubSpot. How do we build more stuff like that on a continuous basis for our clients? Things like marketing resources. So Moz has this Google algorithm change history log. It documents all the changes that have been announced. And it's a great resource that gets tons of links, so it's huge SEO value. We know how important that is. Tons of visits. And that's become a very big asset for Moz. So how do we build more things like that on an ongoing basis to the site? Now, of course, you have general updates. You have things the client wants, updates, new team members, new events. And up to this point, what we have to do, we have to like build that into a project, and then we give them a quote, and then they don't want to spend the money. And no, we can add those things into our wish list, into that ongoing wish list we're always updating, and we can start implementing those things. Now, here's my little plug for HubSpot. We did release some new smart content stuff. So now we have more and more ability to build some context around the users, even if we don't have their information. Anonymous smart content. So you can do it by country, by device, and by referral source, by URL, and tailor the experience they get. Some of the things that we were just talking about. So some of the new capabilities include smart forms. Which form do you want to show? HubSpot did a test where on their mobile tests, they showed a different form that was shorter and easier for mobile users. They had a 5-time conversion rate improvement by using smart forms. Anonymous CTAs, new smart HTML modules, which are really huge for anyone who plays around with that stuff. And template level smart content where you can apply it across a whole template. So that's some things to consider that you already have on your fingertips that you can start implementing in growth-driven design. And so out of this giant wish list, how do we know what we want to actually start working on? So we're going to have all these action items. And for every action item, we have to put together a hypothesis statement. And a hypothesis statement sounds like something like this. For Marketing Mary, so for your persona, visiting the pricing page, so the page that you're targeting, we believe that changing enterprise pricing, so the thing that's the status quo, into request a quote, which is your proposed change, will result in an MQL conversion rate boost by 10%. So what impact is that going to have? We believe this to be true because, and this is where you cite previous research, whether that's proactive user research, whether that's qualitative research, whether that's looking at previous experiments that you've run and previous actions you've taken that you've learned, or learning from marketing and sales. You link to why you think this is true. And then us internally at an agency, we need to say, what is the expected impact this is going to have? Not only for the client to get to their goals, but the value the end user is going to have. How much effort is required to complete this action item? How much work is our team going to have to put in? Then we need to say, what metrics are we going to measure to validate this, right? So there's metrics we have to set up to test this and figure out, was this right or not? So what are those metrics we need to set up testing for? And when is there a definition of complete? And that's really important because at the end of the day, when you run a hypothesis like this, you collect the data and it's not what you expect. If you don't define when this is 100% complete, you can always say, well, we could have done something different, or we didn't do it all the way, and so that's why it didn't work. But when you define when something is complete, you know definitively the impact that it has based off of the metrics you collected. So we're building this out for each task on our wish list. From there, we have all these items, and we can start prioritizing them based off of what we just wrote out, and prioritize them based off of high, medium, and low expected impact. What do we do from there? So we have all these items. How does this turn into a continuous model? Well, let's look at the iteration portion of this, the continuous part of this, the retainer part of this. Well, all of this is driven around the user. The user is at the center and the heart and the core of what we do here. We always have to be asking, how does this affect the user? What value does this get from the user? And so we put them in the center to keep them top of mind. But high level, and we'll dig into these in just a second, we start off with a planning phase. Every cycle starts with figuring out what are we trying to accomplish, what will have the most impact. Then we go into the development phase where we start actually building some of this stuff out. We go into the learning phase, so based off of what we've implemented, what have we learned? Have we validated, or do we need to pivot, or do we need to kill what we're doing? And then lastly, we hit a transfer phase. And this is where you start looking at, based off of what we learned, what can we go to the marketing and sales and improve what we're doing on the inbound marketing and inbound sales side? And then the cycle repeats. So let's dig into these. Plan. Starts off by looking at the performance of what you want to test based off of the goals you're trying to achieve and figuring out, are we going in the right direction? Where are there areas of opportunity? What do we need to do to keep moving in the right direction for this client? And a lot of times coming out of that, you need to collect additional data or research. So you might need to go back to the numbers. You might need to go and put together some user testing to try and figure out, based off of performance and goals, where do you need to focus? This is also the part where you're going to go to the marketing and sales team and say, what have you learned since our last cycle that may help us improve the site? Maybe they wrote a blog post that just crushes it. And that topic that crushes it talks about some type of point of pain that the user's having. By that blog performing so well, we've learned something about the user. We've learned about how that point of pain resonates. So how can we take what that point of pain is and start integrating that more into the site and testing against that? Now we go through and we brainstorm and prioritize the wish list. So at the start of every cycle, you revisit your wish list and you add more things in. So if the client comes to you and says, can you do this, can you do this? You add it to the wish list and you can prioritize it into the cycle. So it's a very agile approach where you can always be adding and changing things as you go. And then lastly, you plan your sprint cycle. So based off of the retainer they buy, the size of the retainer they buy, you know how much time you can dedicate in your sprint for that cycle, and you can pick the most impactful things from the top of the list and move your way down until you've filled out as much stuff you can complete within that retainer and within that time allotted. Now, you're probably wondering, well, let's go into the details of this. I want to see how this all works from the agency side and from a step-by-step process side. For sake of time, we're not going to get into it today, but we do have 2 training courses that I'll mention at the end on growthdrivendesign.com. These courses are not available yet. You have to sign up for registration, but we'll send them out once they become available. So go there to refer how this looks on a detailed level. So the second part of this cycle is develop. This is where we actually get our hands dirty. We start implementing these tasks that we've picked off of our list. And it's an all hands-on-deck effort. Everyone on the team needs to be working collaboratively and together on completing these tasks. And that's the way that you're going to become more and more efficient as you're going through these cycles, is when you have everyone working on things all at once versus having very disjointed pieces of people working on things at different times. Again, you need to set up your validation tracking. Whatever you're testing, whatever that metric that you're measuring at the end of your hypothesis card, you need to make sure that you set that up so that when you come to the learning phase, you've collected data around whether or not you're going in the right direction. And then at the end of the day, we need to drive traffic to whatever changes we make. So you're going to develop a marketing campaign or maybe a mini marketing campaign. Might be social, might be PPC, it might be blogs that drive people to this area. But getting people to come here so you can start collecting data and start analyzing how people are interacting with that change that you've made. So out of that, we start learning about the user. And we start learning about after we run our experiment and review the data, we know whether we're moving in the right direction, and we can either validate what we're doing and figure out, okay, if we've added social proof to our landing page and it's increased our conversion rate, we know that social proof is a trigger point that our audience resonates with our audience. So knowing that social proof is important, how can we start doing social proof on our emails? How do we start doing social proof on our call to actions? And thinking about how you can take what you've learned and start moving them into other things. And of course, you want to publish the results publicly and make them available in your agency that anyone can refer back a year down the road and look at what was learned previously. The marketing team can go and figure out what you're learning. And if you're publishing this, obviously these are the reports you're giving to the client. You're giving a very data-driven approach to how you're improving their site, which they can turn and show their CEO, and their CEO will really love this data-driven approach. And then lastly, transfer. So again, this is where we go and we see what did we learn and how can this influence our marketing and sales? And we start creating recommendations for them so that they can start improving what they're doing. And then lastly, going and educating those teams on what you've learned and how to make improvements. And so all of this process is what makes up growth-driven design, this continuous improvement model. And what we see again is this month-over-month improvement in what they're doing and integrating into your inbound marketing and sales versus your static traditional website redesign model. And when we look back at the risks that are associated with traditional website redesign, growth-driven design, again, mitigates a lot of these. A client is not going to spend $30,000 up front. That's one of the biggest barriers in the sales process. You tell them, okay, we're going to spend $5,000 a month retainer. And the first month, we're going to do strategy in your Launchpad site, and then we're going to iterate from there. That's a much easier pill to swallow in the sales process. And from a revenue standpoint, that revenue is much higher than most likely than your standard website. So you're building more revenue per website in the growth-driven design model. You're doing a Launchpad site. You're getting something out there quick. There's something that they can go back to the CEO and show results a month later. That's great. It's agile. You're adding things every month onto that wish list. You're producing things on time and on budget because you know every month how much time, you're breaking it down into monthly chunks versus this giant 3-month project. You're validating along the way and making sure you're going in the right direction and then providing that validation to the client so that they can show their boss. And it's a continuous improvement model. So this is from the client side. From our side, the agency side, again, all those client risks are important for us. We want to see the best results for our clients. But then two, we're doing this in a data-driven way, right? It gives us a retainer model that allows us to have a much more stable growth revenue, whether you layer that on top of an inbound marketing, which is what I would suggest as an upsell, or start with growth-driven design and then upsell into inbound marketing. Either way, growth-driven design gives you a retainer model that's much more stable and allows you to grow your agency much better than traditional. It's also easier to do the quoting. As long as you know how much the Launchpad website costs and what kind of tasks are on your wish list, it's much easier to quote. You're not quoting this giant project. You're quoting in pieces. And you don't have to worry so much about scope creep because you can always add things into the wish list. And if you find that your wish list is, you can't implement enough in each sprint, that's where you can start having conversations about increasing the retainer. And again, this is a packaged process. This is taking things like smart content, conversion rate optimization, UX stuff, all these disjointed pieces that we really don't have a good place or time or way to use them, and putting it into a packaged system that we can start implementing within our agencies. So let's go back to Edmund and see where we left him off. Last time we left him, he was in the middle of a huge challenge. He was in the middle of a storm, and he knew that if he continued with the weather in this set path that he put, he would for sure die, and his team would perish. And so just as things looked most grim and just as things looked most bleak, he had an idea. He said, I don't have to follow this mapped out plan. I can adapt based off of the winds conditions, the snowfall, the visibility. I can change our path and change our times in order to be a little more agile and flow and get up the side of the mountain. I don't have to follow this path that we've planned out. And by being agile and being able to be adaptive and continuously taking conditions in and adapting along the way, lo and behold, on May of 1953, May 28th at 11:30, Edmund and his partner reached the peak of Everest. And so I'll close out today with a quote from Edmund. He says, I will come again and conquer you, because as a mountain you cannot grow, but as a human I can. And so my call to action for you today is to grow as an individual, grow as an agency, and see a better way to approach your website design process, a better way to produce results for your clients, and a better way to grow your business, and to start thinking about growth-driven design in your agencies. So to do that, I've already talked to a few agencies about this. I'm looking for early adopters that want to get involved in this process. We have a bunch of the agencies, they're all here, or they're pretty much all here already, who have heard this, they believe in it, they have good things to say about it, and I'm looking for more people to join this as early adopters. Now the way to do that is going to growthdrivendesign.com. Like I said, we have 2 training courses. You're probably asking yourself, Luke, What is the step-by-step process? Do you have templates for this? How do you run experiments? How do you interpret data? What experiments do you know how to run? All of this is outlined out step by step in our first deep dive training course on growthdrivendesign.com. Again, you have to sign up for these and get notified for registration. They're not available quite yet. Just sign up and you'll have access to it. The second one is an agency blueprint. So how do we talk about this with clients? How do we market this? How do we sell this? How do we do client services? How do you build a team around this concept and this model? That's the second course that you can sign up for. And what I'm offering to do, what I've thrown out there is I want to work exclusively with 3 agencies on building this out. So I'd love to work with everyone. I have a full-time job. I only have room to work with 3. So if you're interested in this and it's something you want to pursue, you can become an early adopter and have the chance to work with myself and the other HubSpot teams and access the resources and tools that we're building. We're going to make it available to everyone, but this is more of a hand-by-hand thing. The way to get access to this is go to growthdrivendesign.com and sign up for the agency course. After that, shoot me an email letting me know you'd like to work hand-in-hand. And in that email, I want you to tell me the 3 reasons why this is an interesting and why you're motivated in learning more about this. So sign up for it on growthdrivendesign.com. Shoot me an email. Let me know the 3 reasons why you're really interested in getting involved. And then I'll let you know if we're able to work together or if it's a little bit less touch model.